back to the DGD podcast. As always, the NCDGD himself, Robert Reynolds. And today we're talking Gator football, right on our Enemy Intel series here. We're bringing in David Waters from the Gator Breakdown. David, welcome to the show, my man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, listen, this is a Georgia, right? This is a Georgia podcast and show. But I'm telling you right now, this is something that the folks might not realize. I'm about to be nice today, right? And when we're talking Gators, so I'm just letting you know. But listen, there's a lot that I want to ask, and a lot of things I think the people want to know about Florida. But before we get started, make sure to go check out our friends over at Alumni Hall. Alumni Hall. Listen, 10 minutes away from campus. Yeah, you got licensed apparel, Nike, Columbia, right? All this type. Everything you need, right? To show off your dog gear, right? Dog fandom. Go check them out, Alumni Hall in store or alumnihall.com. Give them a shout out. Let them know that DGD sent you. With that being said, David, first off, I feel like it's been a crazy off season, crazy off season for the Gators, right? Absolutely crazy, right? Our favorite punchline: Dan Mullen leaves the program, right? And then Billy Napier comes in. The crazy thing about it, though, from an outsider's perspective, is just from a mile high standpoint at that. Like, it just seems like the Florida fans aren't happy still. Let's just go ahead and get that out of the way. What are the overall vibes right now from this off season from the Florida Gators perspective?
Yeah, going to the offseason, of course, you always start with recruiting. And Gator fans know better than anybody out there what level of recruiting it takes to catch up with Alabama, to catch up with Georgia, what it's going to take to compete year in and year out with those two clubs. So, a lot of people, I think, expected Billy Napier. Yeah, he has a reputation for being able to recruit back to his time at Clemson, back to his time in Alabama, and then being able to build up in the Sun Belt, Louisiana, recruiting at a high level for a Sun Belt team there at Louisiana, being able to build that team up. So I think a lot of Gator fans were excited about the potential of recruiting, but they expected, for whatever reason, instant results. And look, there is a reason Dan Mullen was fired at Florida. There was a reason Florida had to move on from Dan Mullen. That was mainly the outlook of recruiting. That was what was going to hurt Florida. No matter if Dan Mullen, how good of a coach he was, it was never going to be sustainable. It was never going to be consistent to go win the SEC East or compete for an SEC championship. So a lot of relationships in the state were, just hurt by Dan Mullen's approach. Billy Napier had I think it was back in February or early March. He had a big high school. He went to a big high school clinic that they invited him to go to. He went, spoke to coaches and all that. And I saw it on Twitter and was sharing that. And then I had the guy on that Twitter account, he DM'd me behind the scenes. He was like, hey, we invited Mullen to do this. And he never did it. Not one time. And Billy Napier. So that right there lets you know the relationship between Dan Mullen and high school coaches, high school players, probably not the best in the state of Florida. Didn't have the best reputation of reaching out and trying to create relationships there. So that's what Billy Napier has to overcome a bit. It's not going to be an instant fix. Our top 5 classes needed to go compete for national championships and go beat Georgia and go beat Alabama. Absolutely it is. But at the same time, ask yourself, if you're a Florida fan or any college football fan out there, how likely was it for him to come in and out-recruit Nick Saban, out-recruit Kirby Smart, out-recruit Lincoln Riley out there at USC, Jimbo Fisher, and what Texas A&M has going on? So, there is a lot to look at. Yeah, do fans want top 5 classes? Absolutely. But look at the realistic possibility of that happening, him coming in right now and getting that done.
Absolutely. My thought was this, right? Right? There were some comments that Mullen left, like even last season, right? Though, we'll get to that when it's recruiting season. Like
that was me who asked that question, by the way. So
I'm so glad. Oh my God! All right, Georgia fans, if you heard that, that's right there. So that's all I needed to know, because it just showed you, in my opinion, from a Georgia perspective, how far off the philosophies were between Kirby Smart and Dan Mullen, and why Dan Mullen wasn't the right answer, right? I don't know if you're familiar with it, but if you talk to Kirby about recruiting, he'll sit there and talk to you for a week and basically, hey, you're always recruiting, right? And you are, right? You really are. So just to hear, when you ask that question, I'm glad you asked that question, because not only did it become a meme, or did it become viral, but it just really showed the desync, right, of him in the recruiting process. Because when Napier gets to Florida, within a couple weeks, you have an IMG commit, and that never
Mhm.
happened. That
Never.
never happened
Nope.
under Mullen, right? And to me, I always thought that Mullen couldn't even get in the door at IMG. So maybe those relationships are immediately fixed, because apparently you get a IMG kid. So it's like, okay, okay. But we're talking about recruiting, and I think this is one of my main questions. I'm just going to let you know now. We have a Make Juan Laugh Again campaign going on for our chat here at the Brigade. Just letting you know, because Juan's not here, they're trying to make me laugh. So if I smirk or something like that, that's what's happening. So I'm just letting you know, so it's no disrespect to you. I'm just letting you know they're on a mission, okay?
All right.
Um, but moving on from that, the cocktail party. I think this might be one of the biggest questions, and I want to get your thoughts on where, at least your opinion, right, on the cocktail party. Should it be in Jacksonville every year, or do you think it should be a home and home? What are your overall thoughts on that, from your perspective, and then maybe in comparison or contrast to what the state of, what the program in Gainesville is thinking? What's your thoughts on that?
So a little more on my background first, because that does come into play a little bit. I was born in Jacksonville, but me and my family moved to Southeast Georgia when I was 3 years old. So I was raised in Georgia, basically. So of course, raised a Gator. My family's Gators. So I was raised a Gator. But all my best friends I grew up with through elementary school, middle school, high school, college. That was our game. I grew up in Blackshear, Stetson Bennett's hometown. That's where I grew up. And that was our game. That's Southeast Georgia's game. It's a lot closer ride to Jacksonville than it is to Athens. I had many friends
Absolutely.
who didn't go to Athens at all, and their one game a year was to take the short trip down to Jacksonville and watch their Bulldogs play, and watch them play against the Gators. So that's my background. The game holds a special place in my heart. Yeah, in Jacksonville, because in the area I grew up in, Jacksonville is my hometown. That's where I live right now as well. All my family's in Jacksonville, but that was our trip. Me, all my 5, 6 Georgia buddies gather up in a vehicle and take the track down to Jacksonville. So that's my background. There is some bias there because of that aspect of it there. But also, look, we're losing tradition of college football week by week. It seems like, and that is college football's one of college football's biggest traditions, right there, right up there with Texas and OU as far as neutral site rivalries go. You don't ever hear about that game being moved. So, but for whatever reason, we hear about this game being moved a whole lot with Florida and Georgia. And look, I get Kirby Smart's angle to it. You want to be able to recruit. You want to have every opportunity to have recruits on your campus. But in the way, look, I mean, you're looking at it from an outsider perspective, it's not really hurting recruiting all that much for Georgia when you look at it as in an overall sense. So the game in Jacksonville, I mean, like I said, I'm in Jacksonville now too, so that probably leans some toward bias as well. I'd love for it to stay in Jacksonville. I look forward to that game every year. Look forward to seeing some of my buddies come into town now, and that is just our time to get together. But I will say, could it go home and home at some points? Could they change it up just a little bit so some players, coaches have that experience? Maybe so. If it does leave Jacksonville, if it ever does, I'd love to see it stay in the rotation. I'd love to see it stay, since it's always been in Jacksonville, maybe go Gainesville, Jacksonville, Athens, Jacksonville, and just keep that rotation or something like that. I don't think the game should completely leave Jacksonville.
No, see, I don't know. For me, like, I see the logic on both sides, right? I try to think as unbiased as possible. The one thing that I think about, and I know it's tradition, but one of the things that I look at from a Georgia and a Florida perspective, when you take the Iron Bowl, for example, and say, for instance, every year, right? If you've watched any of the Iron Bowls, Kick Six, things like that, right? There's been some outstanding games, or Bama, LSU, things like this. It wouldn't make sense to move them to a neutral site game. I think it would lose that luster, if you will, right? Yeah, I feel like moving the game home and home maybe even not permanent, right? But it's just because I know we tested it a while back, but like when both teams are good and you have an arguable top three matchup each season on our schedule, right? Georgia goes to Florida or vice versa, right? Florida comes into to the hedges. I'm telling you right now, the the hype for that game, right? The hype for that game, every recruit would go to that game,
Oh yeah.
whether it be for Florida, like it just would happen that way. Now, obviously, Jacksonville, things like that, like I understand there's a lot of ties there to the city, money, monetary, whatever. Do you think it would? How could you get this done to side for both sides, right? I feel as if Kirby wants it to be home and home, and I feel like Florida wants to keep it in Jacksonville. I'm just assuming at this point. Do you sit there and you try to compromise both ways by letting recruits come to the cocktail party on behalf of a certain school? How could we get that? Because I feel like Georgia Florida is this Hatfield McCoy type thing that we're never going to agree on something. But I feel like this is something that you could try to compromise, even though I don't see it happening. But I would like to be able to host recruits
Yep.
because obviously if you're if we were to go home and home, right, it would be every other year
Yep.
that you're losing out on recruiting week. But at the current state and without the ability to host recruits, you're losing a week, period. And with looking at last year's SEC rankings, recruiting matters a whole lot. Now, whether it's for in Georgia's case, finishing top five, things like that, is one thing. However, could it make a difference? Could that 1 week make a difference? Who knows? Now, at the same time, you look at others. Look at Florida. I think that would help a ton. Being able to host a recruit, whether it be in Jacksonville or be at the Swamp every other year. I think if you allow recruits to go to these games, even if it stays in Jacksonville, you're kind of getting the best of both worlds, right? Kirby gets his recruiting, Florida keeps it in game, or Jacksonville, right? I don't think Georgia cares about the travel as much, even though I've heard a lot of people talk about the bus ride for Gators, the plane ride down for, for excuse me, the dogs. But I think if you're able to host recruits, I think it answers itself almost. Well, I mean, is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that would be the first step, I think, is allowing recruits to take place. Whoever is the home team that year, be able to host recruits that year. I do think that should be step number one. And I do. What are the logistics of that? I'm not sure. That would probably be another wrinkle thrown in. How do recruits get there? Are you paying for the travel separately for them because it is a neutral site? There's a lot of logistics to kind of maybe figure out for that as well. Yeah, as far as the travel aspect, by the time Georgia hops on a plane and Florida's on a bus, the time difference really isn't all that great. I mean, is it easier to travel on a bus? Sure, but time-wise, it's not that big of a difference when you factor it into it. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of questions to it, and for one, hosting recruits is the big one because that is pretty much the reasoning we are hearing about this. I know both schools love the money. Jacksonville, every time a contract comes up, is paying more and more, and I know the coaches won't speak on it, but I'm sure the athletic director, I'm sure the administration and the university loves the money that Jacksonville's paying to these schools, and that goes a long way as well. These facilities that Florida and Georgia are building, well, a lot of that's due to because the money they get from Jacksonville. So they would probably lose out on that a bit. Now, wouldn't be such a hit because you still get the money from hosting a home game, but from everything I can gather, being here in Jacksonville, talking to the mayor, talking to behind the scenes, what these schools make from playing that week in Jacksonville money-wise is more than they would make hosting it as a home game. So I know the businesses would love it, of course, because it is one more home game. But looking at it that way, the school itself, they still make more money by what Jacksonville pays than what they would do if they hosted a home game.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, you look at things around the SEC, and which we'll get to that in just a second, but from the overall game perspective, right? There's a lot of money there, and obviously, I think, listen, I understand the logic of it because there's a ton of money. There's a ton of money getting put for both of these schools to keep that game there, right? Under the contract, if I'm not mistaken, the contract expires in 25.
Yeah, 25.
So obviously, we'll see what happens there.
And it's usually re-upped before
Yeah, they typically try to do it in 23
before.
or 24,
Yeah,
something like
right,
that. Yeah. So obviously we'll kind of be having to keep an eye out for that, right? I think it'll be obviously breaking news for both Georgia and Florida whenever they decide to do what they do with that contract. Pretty much, it's just always that way.
Yeah, and maybe it's just because of the Florida. I know Scott Strickland, Florida's athletic director, came out last week after Kirby's comments and said he doesn't see it leaving Jacksonville anytime soon.
Yeah, see, I think now I don't know if you're familiar with McGarity, our former AD.
Yeah.
All right, McGarity was one of those guys where I felt like he was like kind of a yes man, even though he not knocking him, but I think that's just what it was. I feel like Josh Brooks, our current AD, just basically, hey Kirby, what do you need?
Yeah. Well, and McGarity's here in Jacksonville now on the Gator Bowl committee.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's wild, ain't it?
Yeah, that's something else that probably plays into it now too.
Oh, no doubt.
Another angle.
No, so you look at the cocktail party, right? I think they have to allow recruits somehow, right? Like, do you give an allotted amount, right, to sit on the Georgia side, sit on the Florida side? I don't know, right? But we have our first question here from the 6033 DGD, and asks, where does our guest honestly see his team right now in comparison to the Dogs? Which kind of ties us into where we're going, right? This is a Florida Intel show. What are your thoughts right there? How do you see the Gators right now? Obviously, I feel like, well, I'll reserve what I'm going to say and let you speak first. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so of course, we got through SEC Media Days last week, and through no surprise, after talking to so many people last week and going around and kind of looking at what was said through a lot of people, it was you felt the love from Kentucky, you felt the love from Tennessee, getting that hype around those two programs, and where they would probably be voted ahead of Florida. And so no surprise there. But then look, in August, before the season starts, 24/7 Sports will put out their team talent composite rankings, and Florida will still be the second most talented team in the East. Now, nowhere near Georgia, but there will be a separation from Kentucky, and there'll be a separation from Tennessee. So it's really all about developed talent and the transition that Billy Napier has on his hands in year one. So if you just want to look at pure talent comparison, look, there is no comparison. I mean, like I said, there's a reason Dan Mullen was fired. There's a reason we kept trying to compare recruiting to Georgia's, because we knew it wasn't good enough. So when you look at it that way, it takes a special set of players if you're even going to get close, like a couple of years with Trask and Pitts and Tony. Even though Florida's defense was absolutely terrible that year, you had a special set of players to go get it done. Does Florida have this special set of players? Can Anthony Richardson live up to some of the potential that we've seen this year? Can he be 100% healthy this year? Can he not get thrown into the wolves with, all right, well, we don't know if you're going to start versus Georgia all week, but hey, day before the game, yeah, okay, let's just throw you out there. You didn't prepare as a starter the whole week, but let's throw you out there against one of the best defenses we've ever seen. He won't have that this year. There'll be more of a coaching staff willing to work with him and willing to build him up through spring and fall camp. But talent-wise, overall talent-wise, it would be an upset. If Florida beat Georgia, no doubt about it. It would be a huge upset when you look at all the factors. A first-year head coach, talent not even really comparable. Does Florida have a good start in 22? Yeah, I think so. But if Florida gets the least bit of injuries this year, they gotta go way down the depth chart to sit there and find anybody that's proven, and it's all based on potential and not a lot of experience on that second level. So I think when you start comparing yourself to Georgia, yeah, there is a clear separation. Whether you want to look at talent, there's a separation, and whether you want to look at who you have coming back, whether you want to look at the transition going between Mullen and Napier, there are definitely things that you keep pegging that keeps Florida down. Would it be surprising to me if Florida finished the second to East? No, I don't. I mean, I still think there's enough talent. Kentucky, I'm not a big Will Levis fan, so I know he's getting a whole lot of hype. I'm not.
He's also getting a lot of criticism for putting mayonnaise in his damn coffee. It makes no sense, man.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, that was kind of gross too. In Tennessee, no matter how bad Florida was last year, they still beat Tennessee, and that was a week.
That's the craziest thing, Dave. Right. That's the craziest thing.
A week after going against Alabama, Florida, you lost a very close game to Alabama. You could have completely given up and then beat Tennessee by multiple scores the very next week. Then the wheels fell off the next week at Kentucky. It wasn't that. A lot of people say, "Oh, it was the Alabama hangover." Well, there really wasn't a hangover. The very next week, they pounded Tennessee. and
Yeah,
then they
I don't know
really
how to
fall off.
explain that, but
So
yeah, that to me just shows you Tennessee just has this. I don't know how to explain it. It just has this stigma of not beating Florida. Like even when Florida was down as bad as I thought they would, they still got beat. I'm like Tennessee, just Tennessean,
yeah.
Tennessean ain't believing, right?
Yeah, so I
But
think when you factor all that in, there's still enough to point to where Florida's clearly behind Georgia, but still the second best team in the East. But there are also reasons you could say, all right, through a transition, they may be behind Kentucky, they may be behind Tennessee this year.
gotcha. So we've got a slew of questions here that just popped up while we answer this one. So we'll go ahead and this right here. What is Napier's rebuild plan? Right? Um, is it UF itself, the culture, the staff, the program as a whole, et cetera? What's that rebuild plan looking like?
Yeah, so a lot of that goes into him taking the job and all the going through the interview process. So, what is holding Florida back? What needs to be done to rebuild and then take the next step? And a lot of it was, buy-in. Much like when Kirby took over for Rick, and there had to be a buy-in from the administration, and there had to be a buy-in from boosters to, hey, we need to get on the same page. The money might be there, the money might not be there. But either way, we all need to be on the same page. We all need to set a common goal, and that's what Florida's running into a years of boosters wanting money to go certain places and not here or there, and admin support of look. We all know what happens in recruiting of maybe being a little too conservative on the approach of recruiting, and then certain people just standing in the way of those type of things. So I think there had to be a clear understanding of in order for us to get to this level, this is what need to happen. I need admin support. I need booster support. I need everything I need to be able to hire an army of staff like he has done, and that needed to be fix number one. And look, unlikely as it may have been, he had to go and trust and confidant Jim McElwain, former Florida head coach, a lot of connections there. He had to go talk to Jim McElwain and say, hey, what do you think holds Florida back? What do you think held Florida back? There was a conversation there, and probably a productive conversation, because Jim McElwain told him everything that needed to change. And that went a long way in some of his requests and him ultimately accepting the Florida job. So that was step number one. And then if you want to go to recruiting, it's take back the state of Florida. Too long have Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson coming in and taking the high-level guys. And Florida's off to a good start right now. I think 13 commits and 11 are in the state of Florida. So you can already see that factor out there. And the other two are from the state of Georgia. So a big factor of looking and getting those guys in the state of Florida, but also staying Southeast as well. So those are the two big things: getting buy-in, getting money for support, but also taking back the state of Florida in recruiting.
Absolutely, which kind of leads us into our next question from Ruse as well. Is that what type of player is he targeting? Right, I know you mentioned trying to lock down the state, things like that, but are you looking at versatility? Burners, right? What kind of like certain types of characters? What are you seeing in regards to what type of player, from a recruiting standpoint, Billy Napier's trying to recruit?
Yeah, if we just start with commits right now on the defensive side of the ball, Florida has a few guys where that they're looking at that defensive end outside linebacker, so they're getting some versatility there. Is the guy defensive end? Is the guy an outside linebacker? Can he move around and play both? So you can tell early on as far as recruiting goes, in those kind of two positions, it's trying to get some speed, some versatility there on the edge for Florida, but also on the offensive side of the ball. Florida, if you look at the receiver core right now, not a lot of speed, a lot of big body possession type receivers. They're trying to get more speed at the position. Eugene Wilson, one of the top ranked players in Florida's class right now, very versatile burner. He can take a screen pass 60 yards, or he can go and burn the defense and get behind the defense, take the top off of a defense as well. So even through taking recruiting into account and kind of seeing what they're working on in strength and conditioning as well, speed is a big factor that Billy Napier wants to put in for recruiting and development of his current players.
There you go. I always wondered. Obviously, it looked like with Mullen there was a different type, and even now, right? I think you can kind of see that philosophy change. I feel like you start to see looking for more physicality. I think Mullen had more of a finesse approach, and sometimes when it comes to SEC ball, especially when you're playing Georgia, when you're playing right Alabama or LSU every year, right? Like sometimes you need that physicality, and the finesse will just get outweighed over that. So I think kind of seeing that philosophy change, I think is actually pretty interesting to see. And
And
obviously,
that's kind of crazy too, because if you go back and look about it, I've asked this question, and kind of going back to one of your previous questions, how close is Florida? All right, well, the last two times they played Alabama, it was a one-score game, and you go back, I mean, it was just last year where Alabama comes into the swamp. Florida beat them up. Florida lost the game. Don't get me wrong. No making excuses, but Florida beat up Alabama in the second half of that game. I mean, if Florida hits that 2-point conversion at the end of the game's going to overtime. So Florida beat up Alabama, beat up Tennessee the very next week, and then, as I mentioned, the wheels fell off. But it wasn't that long ago after that Alabama game, people were asking themselves, okay, is it Florida Georgia run in the East? Because before that, it was like, okay, Florida loses Trask, Florida loses Pitts and Tony, they're going to take a step back. And then after playing Alabama close again, it was, okay, well, maybe we wrote Florida off too soon. And maybe it is a true Florida-Georgia battle. And we all know it didn't end up that way. Nothing was sustainable last year, but it wasn't that long ago. Florida's playing Alabama very tough. And we're asking ourselves, is it still a competition between Florida and Georgia? Ultimately, it didn't end up that way, but it wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, no, I think, looking at it right there, I got a lot of grief last year. Around this time, or maybe June or something like that, I did my SEC predictions at the time last year, and I was like, I was looking at it, and I thought Florida was going to finish fourth, and trust me, I heard it. Oh my God, I heard it. But then, then you look at what happened with Dan Mullen. It's like, thank you, Mullen, for making me look smart somewhat, right? Like, obviously, you look at the Alabama game, right? Alabama was on a different playing level than most everybody else anyway, but to play them close, you're like, okay, let's see what happened. Even though Emory wrote that down right in the 2-point conversion until the cows came home, forgot to let go almost. Like,
yeah, it was there.
Oh, I mean, it was. He just wrote that damn thing too long, man. Like, it is what it is. But so we'll read his last question, Dave, and then we'll hop into our Gators season projection. But to lead us into that projection, DJ asks, what would a good season look like in year one for Billy to you? Do you think Florida fans will give him more time than coaches in the past to get things turned around?
I think so, as long as recruiting is trending up along the way. You can't go 7-5 this year and end up 15th in recruiting. That's not going to get a whole lot of people excited. Now, don't get me wrong. As I said, there are certain aspects. Do I think recruiting is going to trend up? I do, but you're not going to get many people excited if that is a year one result right there. So I think when you look at it, you start off with Utah and Kentucky, the first couple games. We talked about physicality. Well, those two teams are going to bring physicality to the swamp week 1 and week 2. You'd love for a good season, Florida needs to split those two games right there at least. If you go 2-0, absolutely great. But if you want to start looking at a good season for Florida, they need to start by splitting those two games right there, beating Tennessee a couple weeks later, keep that streak going, and then you just got to be competitive from the rest of the year on until you get to November. Now, you got LSU and Georgia in October, of course. You'd love to split those games too. That would be another, I think, sign that, all right, you split LSU, you split Georgia. That is a good sign. And then, but you got Georgia and Texas A&M back-to-back. Very, very tough. Playing in Jacksonville, going on the road a week later to College Station. You need to look competitive there if you want to start talking about good season. But then after that, you got Vanderbilt, South Carolina, Florida State. So up to that point, and to start splitting some of those games that I mentioned, Utah and Kentucky, and then beat Tennessee, split LSU, Georgia. But then you need to win out going in November. You need to have some good feelings going into bowl season that you finish the season on a high note. You need to go beat Vandy, which should happen, but you don't need to lose to South Carolina like you did last year. You need to continue.
Oh, that was bad.
I mean, that was pretty much the end right there.
Well, that was the nail in the coffin for sure. Yeah. If it wasn't sealed, you just basically took an extra one and just
pretty much.
Put it in. Yeah, that was rough.
And then you need to continue to beat FSU at any year as well. So if you end the season 3-0, Vanderbilt, South Carolina, FSU, then you start looking. Those are positive signs there for Billy Napier when you start looking at who you beat. Because Florida's got a pretty tough schedule. 8-4 is going to have some good wins built in there. Now, I
Yeah,
think
no doubt.
you want better than that, but you can point to some positive signs as long as November is trending up at the end of the year.
Yeah, my thoughts are this right here. I want to get your thoughts on this, right? You always hear Miami basically just trashing Florida for ducking them, right? Would you rather play Florida State or Miami every year?
I mean, Florida State's just because the history's been there. I mean, look, of course, I grew up in the '90s, so Florida State is, of course, that game holds a lot of
Yeah,
rivalry.
both teams used to be actually like nationally
right. I mean,
prominent.
Florida State was what Georgia Alabama is now. I mean, that's what that game was. It came down to, all right, whoever wins the end of the year, you might go play each other again, because that's exactly what happened. But win that game and you're setting yourself up for a national championship run.
See, I wish I could see both of y'all play it, but I just don't know how it would be feasible. You know what I mean? Like
it's
that.
not, yeah.
Well, that's what my thought
the series, and Florida does play Miami 24-25, so
Yeah.
it is coming up again. But I mean, how fair would it be for Florida to have to play FSU, Miami every year, thrown in with an SEC championship game, thrown in with Georgia? It's not feasible. And look, we might be getting that in the
SEC. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and we might be getting that in the SEC soon with 9-10 conference games. So, it's
well, there's some teams about to get a rude awakening. I don't want to. I'm just saying, like, and listen, I promised we're about to get into this schedule, but I have to do my little tangent here, folks. Texas playing Alabama in week 2 is all pretty and it's nice, but then tell them, hey, go play A&M next week.
Yep.
And then after that, go play Ole Miss. Your crossover is Florida, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, Florida's got a stretch this year. I mean, okay, Kentucky, Utah, Kentucky, week 1 and 2. Then you have LSU bye week, Georgia, A&M.
It's insane. It's like this is why nobody's really going to change my mind that SEC has the hardest conference slate. Period.
Yeah.
Even in the East, like I understand. Listen, Vanderbilt can go on somewhere, right? Go to the Ivy League or something. I get that, right? Like there's no value there. But when you think about this, say early 2010s, Dave, when you had Aaron Murray led Georgia, right, with Todd Gurley and all those folks. But then you had Florida that was actually a legit team too. Tennessee with Dobbs at the same time. Like there used to be some really, really good football in the East. And it just shows you, like, while the pendulum has swung to the West, there was a time in the 90s where the East was the place to be in the country. Like the SEC East with Florida and Tennessee, even though the dogs were kind of down, SEC East was ridiculous.
I still remember, what was it, 2012? Florida had the one loss to Georgia in the regular season. Georgia goes on to there. South Carolina was really good with Jadeveon Clowney that year. I mean, yeah, it wasn't that long ago.
South Carolina was ranked in like the top 15, top 10.
Right.
Like, I mean, that was crazy to have Spurrier there.
Yeah.
And I think that was right before. Was that right before Urban left, or was that after Urban left?
That was after, because that was 2012 was Muschamp's big year. It was his second season, and the only loss was to Georgia in the cocktail party. I still go back to that last year. I mean, there was a slight chance Florida and Georgia could have been playing in a national championship game that year, because if I think I lost your connection there.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
I got you. I mean, there was a slight chance. Florida was going into the last week of that season. They had beat FSU. If Notre Dame had lost to USC, if Georgia would have beat Alabama, there was a slight chance Florida and Georgia could have been beaten for the national championship that year.
The crazy thing is, though, you look back at, was it 2011, 2012 with LSU and Bama, right?
Yeah, 11.
And
yep.
Now Georgia that year was ridiculous as well. But if you go back and watch that game, like those two teams deserved it. Like I know the 21-0 score in the championship game shows one thing, but I'm telling you, if you watch that 9-6 game, you'll understand. Yeah. Like if you're a Big 12 fan, it was not for you, not for you. But anyway, we've went on this rabbit hole a little bit here. So let's jump into the Florida schedule, Dave. Yep. We'll break it down 6 games, and kind of get a feel where we are going into this season. Actually, instead of 6 games, we'll go up until the bye week and then after the bye week. All right, so if you're unable to, if you're listening, I will break it down for you. If you're watching, go along with us. Florida's schedule is as follows: you open up in the swamp against Utah, and then Kentucky comes to town in week 2. Week 3, you have South Florida, followed by a road trip to Tennessee. Then Eastern Washington comes to town, and followed by Mizzou and LSU. All right, so that's your 7 games. Right, so we're doing 7 games first. Obviously, the bye week, as we know, we'll talk more about that on the back end of this. What are your thoughts on this first, leading up to the bye week, Dave? What are we looking like in regards to the schedule?
You want me to go win-loss? I mean, because I haven't really done that
we can go win-loss. That's fine. We
I
can break
really
it down
done that on my podcast yet, so I hate to kind of break my
fair point.
My part, because I usually do that like a week or 2 before the season.
No, I will. How about this? Since it's
I have Florida going 9-3.
Okay. So what I'll do is I'll give you my wins and losses here.
Yep.
And I'll let you just analyze it how you feel. If since that way I don't want to ruin something for your podcast.
Yeah. Okay.
That's fair. All right, let's do that. So I'll let you start first. Go ahead and break us down what you're looking at, and then I'm gonna give my breakdown.
Yeah, so as I said, Florida at least has to go 1-1 those first couple games with Utah and Kentucky. You got both games at home. You want to get Billy Napier's tenure off to a good start, and so I think they win one of those games. Tennessee's got to beat Florida before I can see it. I know everybody's falling in love with it and everything. As I said, as down as Florida was last year, they still found a way to pound Tennessee. So look, probably at least 3-1 in those first 4 games. I think it's difficult. LSU, Georgia, A&M. I know you said up to the bye week, but you have this. It starts with LSU right there. I'm going ahead and penciling in Georgia a loss too. So 2 losses right there if you look at it, and then probably one more loss between LSU, A&M. So there's where the 3 losses come in. As I said, I think Florida finishes that November stretch is important once you get to South Carolina, Vanderbilt, Florida State, and then you're looking at it right there. That's pretty much how I break it down.
So I see your logic here. I'm with you on the Tennessee thing, but I'm gonna break it down my way. So I look at Utah, and while it's in the swamp, right? I know that the swamp is a very tough place to play, but Utah comes back right off of a lot of high momentum, right? This is a statement win if Florida pulls this off, right? If they pull it off, it's a statement win. I'm just curious to see how your defense handles against Cameron Rising, because I'm a fan of him, like low-key fan of him. I think he's going to have a great season this year. I'm curious to see. So for me, I think that's a loss, but I think you can knock out Kentucky. I think you get it done this year. I think you get it done. So I'm gonna pencil the L to Utah, and then the dub against Utah. I think I'm gonna go crazy here and say you lose to Utah. Good Lord, lose to Utah, beat Kentucky. So you start your 1-1. You handle South Florida. I think Tennessee loses at home. Y'all surprise them and you upset them on a last minute play. It's just ideally, because as much as I hate the Gators, I also hate the Vols almost just as much. So I think it would be brilliant, right? But my thing is, how can your defense? How does your defense stop that offense, right? That offense last year was the only offense that outside of Alabama in the SEC championship game that really posed an actual problem to start the game. And then we just their depth, they had just played Kentucky with 99 snaps, I think it was. Their defense played the entire game. Georgia was able to just wear them out even worse, right? So it was just able to, just do that. Does Florida have the ability to stop the wave at first? I think it gets done, but it's going to be a crazy game, especially at Neyland.
Yeah,
especially at Neyland.
And if you go back and look at that too, as bad as Todd Grantham was last year, Kentucky's offense didn't do anything on Florida's defense. And Tennessee didn't do what they did to everybody else either. As bad as Todd Grantham was, and he needed to be gone, he was absolutely terrible. He should have been going after 2020. But 2 of his best performances of the year in the SEC play were Kentucky and Tennessee. So make sense of that, what you will. I think Will Levis only had like 71 yards passing there.
They're built to run the ball too.
Yeah, and a lot of that was one Rondell Robinson screen pass that he took to the house. And it took a blocked field goal. It took 12 penalties by Florida for Kentucky to get that upset at home. As I said, we've talked about Florida, Kentucky from last year as well. As I said, I mean, there's if you go back to last year, there are things you can point to where say, if Florida had just better quarterback play or just an average defensive performance, there's no way to lose the games that they lost last year. So I do think Florida in some form or fashion gets penalized a lot for last year for a lackluster staff, for a staff that was pretty much lame duck, had pretty much given up, didn't want to be there.
You could see it. You could see it.
So I do think now, don't get me wrong, it's hard to gauge transition. Sometimes even Nick Saban, you look at the transition at Alabama, it was tough. It was tough in year one. You knew Nick Saban was a great coach. You knew he was going to do good things. Goes and loses, 6 or 7 games year one, loses to Louisiana.
I mean, hell, a lot of people forget that Kirby's first year, we about lost to Nicholls State. We lost to Vanderbilt.
Right.
Like,
so
people have to understand that there's a grain of salt that comes with there and a little bit of patience is needed. Yeah. Right. Like by year 2, I mean, think about it. Not only are you getting, you're transitioning, but you're getting rid of other people's players, right? Like you're changing a culture, whatever the case may be, right? It's difficult. Now, one of our commenters here, DJ, says winning against Utah is a Notre Dame type win for the Florida program if they pull it off. It's kind of high that you could ride the entire season. I agree with that. I think if you're able to beat Utah in week 1, you look at that as right, like for where you are, right? Years past, Florida looks at that as just another game to beat and just moving on. But where I feel like where Florida is right now, that is the kind of momentum that can propel them to a 8-4 season, 9-3, even crazier.
Right? I mean, and look at it this way: in a transition, since we're talking about transition, players are looking for a reason to buy in. Right now, the buy-in is hope. The hope is new staff's coming in, but then tangible results have to start happening. And if the tangible result can come in week 1, there's your buy-in right there. Everything this staff is doing different than the last staff paid off, and we got a top 10 win in game 1. Your buy-in is pretty much already right there. Now, can you get overconfident and go lose to Kentucky week 2? Absolutely you can. But, you can see a scenario where Florida beats Utah. It is some kind of spark for the rest of the season.
Absolutely. I think, and as we pull the graphic back up for the rest, for the up until the Georgia game, like I said, handle a 1-1 against those first 2 games. That's a tough slate. I know there's different level of difficulty, right, that we're about to talk about, but Utah should not be looked at as a slouch. I promise you that. And then Kentucky, whether or not, right, Will Levis is a guy, I think Kentucky has earned their right to say, hey, look, we were number 2 in the, you beat us to prove us otherwise, almost. Because with Will Levis there, I'm still curious about their offensive line and how they're going to protect him, because losing Darian Kennard was huge, in my opinion. You know what I mean? So I think, like I said, I have you beating Utah, but losing to Utah, beating Kentucky. Sorry. You win Utah. I mean, South Florida, excuse me. You beat Tennessee, so you start off. Move to Eastern Washington. I think that's a give me, right? Missouri, give me, right? So now you're 5-1 heading into LSU, and you're riding some momentum. And LSU comes into town, right? How will Brian Kelly handle the Swamp in his first year? I think this game could be tricky, but I have you losing to LSU just based off of a talent perspective. LSU just has some freak athletes. Not saying that Florida doesn't, but just there's a different level. And Brian Kelly, with his proven head coach, he's played in high-profile games. So while the Swamp is a difficult place to play, I just – and that will probably be the 3:30 game, perhaps, unless A&M and Bama is playing that. I think they're the 8th, though, so you probably get the 3:30 game there. But I think you lose to LSU, and I think it's just one of those games where it's just a gut punch, right? Like LSU is going to be good. I just don't know how good, right? And then we take it into the bye week, and I think this bye week is going to be much needed. because LSU game is that first of the back half, and that back half outside of Vanderbilt is pretty tough, right? Like looking at what Florida's, I guess you could say the point of the State of the Union, if you will, because after the bye week you have Georgia, and then you go to Cobbville, and then you host South Carolina with Spencer Rattler and company, and then you go to Vanderbilt, which should be, if y'all lose that, God Almighty, that's people pitchforks are coming out, and then obviously you go to Tallahassee to end the season. So obviously, like I said, for me, before the bye week, I have you going 5-2, right, which is respectable for where it's at, right? So now it's just a matter of getting that week, getting that done, right? Getting it done in the back half. And so you, like I said, 5-2 going into the bye week off the loss to LSU, and I think you lose to Georgia. I think you can beat A&M. I think you can do it. I think you can do it. I'm not sold on A&M. I'm just not. I know they've got this recruiting class, but that recruiting class should not be expected to be your main emphasis and your hope for winning games this season. They're not. The quarterback position is scary to me. I don't really know what to look at in regards to their quarterback room, and that's a problem. Even if you're playing at home, a good defense, if you have a subpar quarterback play, you're screwed. So I think you pull off the upset and knock off A&M, right? Knock off A&M. So you're looking at what, 6-4 at this point, or sorry, 6-3 at this point. Excuse me. I think you will. I don't want to sound crazy for this. I think you might lose to South Carolina, but it's going to be very close. But it wouldn't surprise me if y'all won that game, because I know Vanderbilt's a win. So you're bowl eligible, right? We know you're going to be bowl eligible. I don't see Florida State being the biggest problem. I think South Carolina, given Rattler, if he stays healthy, can actually be a problem. I really do. And Cam Smith is a problem in the back secondary. You have him at home, which is a huge help right there. Can South Carolina get it done? I think they do, but it's very, very close. Very close. So, like I said, I think you have, I see an 8-4 season. And listen, that's great for a first year with what Dan Mullen left. Period. There's no getting around an 8-4 season. So if you're a Florida fan and you're tuning in and you're listening to this is a Georgia fan saying that's a good season for year one right? That's a good season. Everybody has this stigma that 8-4 is trash, David. And to me, I find it laughable, right? Especially in the SEC, 8 wins should be fairly well, right? Now, when you're looking at Georgia, you're looking at Alabama, right? When you lose one game and you're still kind of getting like, oh, what the hell, we lost. It's a different situation. It's different levels to it. 8-4 in the SEC, it's a good season.
Yeah, simple as that. 8-4 in the transition year, when you add Utah at a conference, FSU at a conference, it is pretty good. You look at that FSU game at the end of the year, that was a team that couldn't beat a lame duck staff, couldn't beat a one-legged AR out there. So, Florida should beat FSU again. I think by the time Billy Napier gets into the 12th game of his first year, I think you're kind of at where you're at that point. I think still better than FSU at that point. You look at the schedule too. I mean, there's a lot of home games. The first half of the season, I don't think Florida leaves the state one time in the first.
Crazy.
In the first 8 games. So very home friendly schedule as well. It kind of sets up to help build some momentum. You get that early season momentum. You add in all the home games that go along with it. You can see where Florida could probably build some momentum up with some big wins at home. So 8-4, 9-3 range. I'm probably have my orange and blue glasses on a little bit to lean 9-3. I do think it's that 8-4, 9-3 range right there. And there's some good wins right there if you get in that range.
Looking at the schedule too, right? Like it's wild, right? Like if you need that momentum, this is the perfect schedule for it, because you're all the way up until your bye week. You only leave to go to Knoxville. Now that game might be tough, right? How you handle that, because your defensive depth is going to get tested. I promise you that, right?
Oh, yeah.
So going 8-4 on the schedule seems doable, right? But that also involves Florida being able to win the games they're supposed to win and
Right.
even surprise some people against these games. You just have to surprise somebody. If you start the season off 1-1, right? However you play it, right? If you're going into
Yeah.
your third game with one win, I think that's a telling sign. If you beat Utah, I think that's huge. But I think it might be even bigger if you beat Kentucky, to be
Yeah, it's
honest.
probably more important to beat Kentucky being a
Considering
conference,
conference, yeah.
being in conference. And also, you kind of, if you're looking for one thing Billy Napier would do better than Dan Mullen in year one, Dan Mullen lost to Kentucky. He was the first loss in 31 years to Kentucky.
Yeah, that was a crazy stat that I remember seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
So,
wild.
that would be, and I hate to compare year ones because this schedule was much tougher than 2018 schedule I ever thought about being. But
Yeah.
if you're looking at feathers in the cap, you can at least say, all right, well, Billy Napier's getting back on the right track of beating the team that we are supposed to be beating. Because I've always said, yeah, Kentucky is much better. I respect Kentucky for their growth. But if Florida is Florida, Florida's not losing to Kentucky.
In theory, absolutely. I think you also look at this right here. The reason why I said it's huge for Florida to beat Utah is because of game one in a new regime, right?
Yep.
If you depending on if you're able to win that game, how you win that game could set the tone for the entire regime, at least set a lot of momentum, right?
Yeah.
You set the bar with momentum at a high level if you win against week one, right? If you win in week one. So we'll read some comments here. So as throughout the season, our friend DJ here says that BJ Ojolari alone will be a lot for the Gators to handle. And listen, he ain't wrong. That kid is a absolute baller, right?
Yeah,
Absolute baller.
I like Florida's offensive line as long as they stay healthy this year. A lot of experience coming back. Richard Garage started at left tackle last year. He's back. Ethan White on the left side. He's back. Kingsley Egwakon, he's back. Osiris Torrance comes in, the transfer from Louisiana.
Yeah.
First team All-American there at right guard for Florida. Their only big question is at right tackle. Michael Tarquin looks to be the guy right there stepping in from Florida at right tackle. Got a couple nice depth pieces too with Josh Braun. I know big former Georgia commit ended up committing to Florida when Sam Pittman left. So that was a big to do there. He'll be a nice. I think he can start. He can be a nice depth piece right now for Florida. So I think as long as Florida stays healthy up front, I really like the offensive line, especially the type of style Billy Napier likes to run, and then kind of maybe open it up a little bit more with Anthony Richardson. But I do like Florida's offensive line.
See, excuse me, you had mentioned the problem for offensive line being the right tackle. From a Georgia perspective, I'm licking my chops. And the reason why I say that is because of Jalen Carter.
Yep.
However, and I'm going to pull the schedule back up here, right? The offensive line can be just fine. But even then, you still have to have that, mesh period, right? The offseason only does so much. You still have to get in-game shape or in-game speed, right, with that chemistry. That chemistry matters, which is why with Georgia returning everybody else, for the most part, there's a reason why Georgia has one of the projected highest offensive lines returning, right? It's just one of the best ones because it's just chemistry, right? But if you look at the first half of this or the first few games, right? You look at Utah that lost a lot of pieces on defense. They're still going to return some talent. No, wait. Was it Utah that lost or somebody else? It may be somebody else. Utah is going to be a problem. Now, Kentucky, their defense is good as well. Our friend Rubes here in the comments said he thinks that defense is filthy, really good. And to some degree, Utah and Kentucky to start the season is going to be a true test for Florida, period. There's no question around it. Then after that, you have South Florida, which is a game where I think your offense needs to tune up, get some things worked out, right? Make sure Anthony Richardson, I'm not going to say AR-15 anymore, tried my best not to do that, but Anthony Richardson has to be comfortable in that game. You have to make him comfortable because we don't know right now how his confidence level is going to be against Utah and Kentucky if those defenses start coming off and teeing off, right? I just don't know, right? Obviously, like we talked about last season, his first start was against Georgia, and to me, that was the dumbest move you could have done.
Yep.
Any quarterback, your best friend is confidence. And honestly, putting it against that defense last year, you gave this kid you started him in the 8 foot and told him to swim up when he's 2 inches tall. Like, it's different,
Yeah,
Right?
and going into that, like I would have said, if he would have been preparing as the starter for the whole week, maybe it makes a little more sense. But split reps all week, didn't even know he was going to start until Friday, pretty much day, or maybe even day of the game that Saturday morning. Some kind of questionable, when did he actually really know? But they prepare even as the starter the whole week. And if you ever go throw him in versus that defense, we got to remember there was a bye week there. There should have been 2 weeks. He should have been
That and the game before was a better chance because wasn't the best opponent either, was it?
No, I believe it was LSU where he actually played very, very well. Let me see.
I'm trying to go back on this because I remember that like you could have played him earlier to get that right. Like,
yeah, well, that was one point, and he did get hurt, so that played into it a little bit. But he was pretty healthy by the Kentucky game when he came back. Played very, very little in that game. So it was LSU last year, bye week, Georgia, and he lit up LSU. And Mullen, for whatever reason, still would not name him, starter after that game. As I said, still split reps with Emory Jones the 2 weeks leading up to the Georgia game. I actually believe Emory was not even necessarily splitting reps. He was taking second team reps. So he wasn't getting as many reps as Emory Jones leading up to the Georgia game. So it was a complete disservice there to make his first start versus that defense.
Yeah, obviously, like I said, I think honestly this season hinges on Anthony Richardson's ability to stay healthy, and that's something that I've questioned, just because looking back throughout time, right? Like there hasn't been a season that he stayed healthy. This has to be the year if Florida wants to, take that good first step, make a first impression in this regime. Keeping him healthy it should be your number one objective. There should be no question about that. You have to keep him upright, keep him healthy. Listen, as much as people want to bash about him dancing and getting hurt, like stay healthy. And I think it makes for a better Florida team, right? Even as much as this pains me to say this, a better Florida team makes the SEC fun. Like, because there's actually something. I want to get it back to where it matters. Not saying it doesn't matter, but where you're looking at what it should be, right? Georgia, Florida for the East. Who's going to win that? Whoever wins that game goes and wins the East. No question. They're playing in Atlanta, right? That's the kind of shit that I want to see.
Yep.
Now, I need Florida to keep him healthy, and that's an excellent start to get back to those same, ideology there. That same ideology, I suppose. Obviously, like I said, I got him going 8-4. I think for a first year, right? I think you have to do well on the recruiting trail. I think there's some work to do there. But keep in mind, he's only been there for a few months, right? We see these changes, right, folks? You see these changes. You can pick on it all you want, but bringing this Army in, right? It's something different. It's something different that Dan Mullen didn't even think about doing because he didn't care to fucking recruit, period. No, there's no getting around it. He didn't care to recruit. You have somebody trying to change the culture, change how things are done, right? Buying in, like David said, right?
Believe me, that army is needed because there is a lot of work to do.
Oh no, I mean, and that's the thing. Like I said, you can obviously as a Georgia fan, we're gonna laugh about it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But if you're a real fan, like you have to understand and respect what's going on because there's a lot of work to do that Dan Mullen neglected to do, and now you're playing catch up.
Yep.
And getting these folks in there, right? I'm telling you right now, y'all snagging Corey Raymond was a problem.
Yep.
I think it has the potential to be a problem. Let's just say that, right? Kamari Wilson being one of the main problems that we saw in year one. How that handles, obviously we'll see what happens, right? Recruiting season is never over with, especially in today's world of football. So obviously I think recruiting's got to pick up just a little bit, right? I mean, especially with the big three, right? Yep. It's not even Georgia fans cracking on y'all. It's Miami fans. No, Miami has no room to talk after the weekend they just had. I mean, listen, we just got our safety. I don't think they got anybody yet this weekend. Apparently, I heard people saying 4 for 4. One guy backed off it, pushed his recruitment back, like his commitment date. Joe Nell comes to be a dog, right? Like Peyton Kirkland, obviously y'all was a commit y'all were looking at. So he goes to Texas of all places. Ain't never even been, but goes to Texas. We kind of know what that's about, but I ain't gonna talk about that. It's a whole nother episode. But yeah, so it's Miami fans ain't got no room to talk right now, boy. That's all I'm gonna say. But but looking at it, right, the season, y'all have to make and take advantage of the season. 8-4 is doable, especially with a home-loaded schedule. I think you have to take advantage of that home-loaded schedule. You have to. especially in that first half, right before the bye week. If you
Yep.
take advantage of if you make the most out of that, you can afford a slip up or two. Maybe I would say a slip up, not say two, a slip up, and still finish the season out strong, right? Just saying,
Yeah.
it can happen.
I
It can
think
happen.
simply put, for me, I'm a big believer in AR. So I think the offense will be fine there. Just getting rid of Todd Grantham alone is worth 2 wins to me. So, I mean, it's, I hate to make it that simple, but that guy was completely lost in trying to coach a defense the last couple of years. So I think that right there is worth, make that defense is instantly better by bringing in a new defensive coordinator.
Yeah, no, I mean, at least y'all, hey, we tried to let y'all know, man. We
Oh
tried
yeah,
to let y'all know about
yeah.
Grantham. There's some people, listen,
Hey, look, it makes
there's,
no sense. Like he did the same thing at Georgia as he did at Florida. How do you start so good and then it eventually get to where it's trash?
this is
That's the part I
ridiculous.
don't get. I don't know, how do you start so well and then by year progressively get worse?
I mean, is this something that we're agreeing on right here? One thing every person can agree on is I don't understand how that man has a job as a DC.
Nope.
Not my problem no more. That's all I'm going to
No,
say. I mean, and really not y'all's problem
no,
either.
no,
So,
no, no. Besides
not y'all's
recruiting,
problem
the
either.
leftovers in recruiting, that's about it. So
Yeah, no, that was rough. But Dave, we're gonna wrap this thing up, man. I didn't realize that we're talking Florida for an hour. That's
yeah.
about an hour too much for me, but I had to do it. Uh, but now, so I want to shout out to the brigade for coming in hot and heavy today. Hey, keeping it nice a little bit. I was surprised to keep it somewhat content here. Obviously, having a Gator in the on the show, but at the same time, listen, there was a lot of good questions. So thank you for those questions and the comments. Dave, where can people find you if they want to follow you on social media?
Yeah, they can follow me at GatorDave_SCC. You can get Gators Breakdown on YouTube, favorite podcast platform out there as well. Usually have some leading up to Florida, Georgia. There's a couple of weeks there with the bye week and there too. A lot of coverage going that way. So based here in Jacksonville, so the game means a lot to us covering the game.
Absolutely. Now, I know you. The one way I remember hearing about you was from Twitter Spaces. Is that still a thing that you're doing?
Yeah, I'll ramp it up more during the season. Yeah, I don't do a whole lot of Twitter Spaces in the off season. Trying to concentrate more on my Gators Breakdown Plus side of things. But
Fair
yeah,
play.
once the season ramps up, definitely get a lot more fan engagement with the Twitter Spaces.
Absolutely. So if you're on Twitter and you follow them, there's actually some pretty insightful stuff. Even if you're a Georgia fan, I've went in there to listen to things. Listen, we have what we're talking about, and then hey, it never hurts to pay attention to your other schools that you play every year. I promise you, you learn some insightful things. So Dave, like I said, that's how I found out about you and the Gator Breakdown. Um, Thanks for coming on today, man. It was a pleasure having you. Looking forward to doing something here in this, in the near future, maybe bringing you back on, perhaps. Um, and like I said, hopefully the brigade didn't treat you too bad. So
Oh, good. Like I said, I was raised in Georgia, so I get used to it.
look at that. There you go. All right, folks. With that being said, we're going to wrap it up for this edition of the Enemy Intel. Obviously, talking Florida. If you're on podcast and hearing this on Tuesday, make sure to tune in for your podcast Saturday as we're talking Mizzou. But we're going to be live Friday talking Missouri with our friends over at the Mizzoucast. Looking forward to that as well. Dave, have a great day, my friend. Brigade, have a great day. We're wrapping this thing up, and we'll catch you on the next time. Go Dogs.